Very good. So, Timmy Sean, it is extremely great to meet you.
Hey, man. It's great to meet you, too.
First of all, how you feeling?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Yeah.
Good. Did you get past the hump of that first shot?
I did. I did. Yeah. I managed to avoid the Tylenol, so I was like, all right, I'm just going to try to ride this out and see if it.
Yeah, my first shot wasn't bad. My second one, I kind of had a headache for a day or two, but it was no big deal in the big picture.
Yeah. Yeah. Well worth it. Yeah.
Worth it. Worth
Yeah.
it, for sure. First of all, love the album. I love the album.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
I'm sort of like that. I feel like I'm that kid. I feel like I'm that kid in whenever I was in high school. I would walk around with a pair of headphones, and be like, "God, check this out, man." You know, like the 21st century version of that right now. So one of the things that whenever I discovered the album in the first place, I thought was really interesting. Of course, the idea of the power pop rock opera, I think, is a brilliant idea. Okay.
Thanks.
It takes my two favorite things. I'm kind of a prog rock nut, and I'm a power pop nut. Like I'm the guy who likes like Rush and Jellyfish are like my bread and butter, you know. And to have somebody kind of tackle that and put it together in a way that was compelling was great. And I was immediately drawn to that idea. And then I started thinking about and noticing that you had said that it was kind of it's inspired by the events of 2020. I think you said as a fictional allegory. Inspired by the events of 2020.
Exactly. Yeah. I didn't really. I found it compelling to write. I mean, everything that I was writing was the stuff we were living through. It was hard to write about anything else last year. But I was like, it's a sensitive subject. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying. So I'm like, I can't really write about this literally, but there's got to be a way in. So as I was writing about it, I'm like, I kept describing 2020. I'm like, it feels like we're living through a horror story. Like, it feels like we're living through a horror movie. I'm like, what if I kind of use that as my in? All right, just try to think of it. All right, it's not COVID. It's a monster that's attacking. And then I started, okay, all right, she's a monster. And that song kind of came out. And once I had that song, that kind of cracked it for me. And then I started breaking down, okay, if I have this coming in, and then I was starting writing, all right, with the spring breakers that are going to the beach last year in the middle of the pandemic, and I was like, all right, and I had this show on the road, which is a song on the album, and I kind of wrote it from that perspective, and it was like, all right, if there was a monster attack, and you had these people that I've been inside for 3 weeks, and I can't take it anymore, I'm going out, and I was like, all right, I wrote Show on the Road, and then it just kind of worked from there, and then I had some songs that were sitting around, and I pulled in from, okay, that could kind of be the beginning of a story. I had the song The College Year, and that was like, all right, that and Fortune and Fame kind of back to back in California. I had these 3 songs that seems like the beginning of a story, and that kind of kicked off the whole, all right, I think I could weave this into a whole rock opera.
Very cool. First of all, does your character in your rock opera have a name?
I went with Guy Scorpio, which it started off with I wanted a generic name and I liked the idea of Guy, and then I came back to me when I was 18. We did my high school band. We all took aliases, and I used Guy Scorpio for this little EP that we put out, and I was like, oh, that's perfect because the character I could definitely, part of it is semi-autobiographic. If I was 18 and I thought I was going to go to Hollywood and become a star, I'm like, in California, I was kind of thinking, I'm like, oh, that was kind of the thought that I had when I was coming out of high school. This is a path that I could have taken. I was like, oh, that's perfect. So I kind of used that as an alternate reality story of where my life could have gone in this, especially the beginning of the album.
And you also said the magic word to me right now. Did you say, like, you're in band or you're in a band?
I was in a band.
I'm a junior high school band director.
Oh, awesome! I mean, I was in the band. I played drums, my first instrument, since I was 2. So I played concert band and marching band for a year, and a little bit of jazz band and stuff in high school. But
so And so the thing that I think, as I listened to the story, I remember that you released it sort of in two parts. And I held out for a long time because I listened to the first part and I was like, oh, it's so good. But I'm kind of a hard copy guy. You know, I wanted to get a CD, so I held out and I held out. So I listened to those songs on Bandcamp for a while in anticipation. And it's funny, like, it has a From Dusk Till Dawn thing that kind of goes on with it. And so, like, the first half is like, okay, cool, right? And then, you know, it happens and there's the skit with the monster and then...
It was, I have a list of influences that I just kind of was jotting down as I was doing the whole album. And a lot of them were movies. Like, I mean, there were definitely albums and things that I pulled from, but that kind of just comes as I'm doing the music. But, like, when I was kind of coming up with a list of... As I was writing the lyrics, which kind of comes last for me, Dusk Till Dawn was right at the top of the list. Like Tarantino, Dusk Till Dawn, like something that kind of just takes a turn, exactly like you said. I like the idea of that moment in the album, and then just kind of I wanted to escalate. I wanted to kind of build and build and build and get, and I ended up writing "Come Back Alive" was like the last full song that I wrote, and I'm like, it just should build to like more and more of a rock thing, and by the end of it, it should be. And I'm a big Kiss fan, and I'm like, I should be like there's an outro to Shock Me. I don't know if you're a Kiss fan at all, but anyway. But there's like a big guitar solo part at the end of it, and I'm like, I want it to build up to like a big rocking riff guitar thing. I'm like, which is definitely different than the way the album started. But I'm like, there isn't really a spot on the album where it just does a big rock guitar thing. And my girlfriend keeps going, I just picture Kiss rocking back and forth to that riff at the end, and I'm like, that's what I'm going for. Good. All right, mission accomplished.
Nice. Yeah, and I also noticed, and this is another thing that's really great about it, when you put yourself in this sort of stipulation of making a power pop rock opera, you kind of hem yourself into like a certain, you know, the 3.5 minute format, right? Which I think you do brilliantly, by the way. Like, each of those songs is generally like a freestanding song. Towards the end, it changes a little bit, right? But certainly it starts out with like, this is a 3-minute song that stands alone on its own, but it definitely has a thread that goes through it. And I think as you go through it, I perceive that the style changes. It's kind of what you're talking about. So at the beginning, like, I really hear like, this is kind of like the Badfinger song. This is kind of like the song where it sounds kind of like Oasis. You're like picking from different points in power pop history, it sounds like to me. That allow you to give it that some breadth of some variety, but still stick within the tradition.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's funny. The original idea that I had for an album was basically just like a love letter to all the music that I grew up with, and it was like Oasis, and for me it was like the late '90s, early 2000s, but like Ben Folds 5 and Phantom Planet, I think I'm wearing that shirt. Yeah, Phantom Planet, and like all these bands that were kind of the later generation, Fountains of Wayne, and it kind of started off as like, oh, I'm just gonna write like Weezer was a big one, and maybe I'll just do like a 10, 12 song power pop album, and that's In California. It was kind of the first song that I was like, all right, let me jump off of that. And I released that as a single, maybe like a year and a half before the album came out. But as I started having songs and songs pile up, and then I started writing during the pandemic last year, it just kind of took on a life of its own. And then I was like, all right, let me rethink this whole album. So it was nice that I started off with standalone song ideas, I think, which I think as opposed to like, oh, let me write a song about 2020, or let me write an album about 2020, I feel like it might have been harder to come up with 3.5-minute pop songs as we were going through that last year. But
sure. And the second half of the album, after you take the turn, you know, after you drive into the vampire club, it feels like it starts to almost like collapse. The styles kind of collapse a little bit. And you talk about Weezer as an influence. I hear that really strongly on that. I often tell people as I'm listening to this, like, it feels like Weezer meets Queen. You know, it's got that big theatrical side to it. I hear the Brian May, I mentioned that once. Your really like bombastic melodic guitar playing harkens to that, but still has that Kiss by way of Weezer.
I mean, Weezer was a huge. I mean, I talked about it recently at an interview, and I started walking through my Weezer history. But it was like their first album came out, like Blue Album came out when I was, I don't know, in like elementary school, and it was like, oh, like Buddy Holly, and I just knew it from a radio hit. And then I saw them when I was in middle school, and Pinkerton came out, and that just blew my mind. And then like my senior year of high school came out with the Green Album. And I saw them when they did their, it was like a reunion tour, but it was like they hadn't played for, 3 years, maybe, if that. But they really kind of defined me growing up. I always associated, like, oh, yeah, the Blue Album, and then Pinkerton, and then the Green Album, those first 3 albums. So as a guitar player, Brian May is a huge influence. And then just as a songwriter, Rivers is a huge influence. So, I mean, that's a pretty good description of some of my biggest influences there.
And especially towards the end, I feel that really strongly. And I also think it's pretty cool towards the end. You stray from the power pop program a little bit by putting a little more like the intros and vignettes in there. And which in me, like that also kind of harkens back to almost like second side of Abbey Road. Where you get into like, okay, all these little things aren't really songs. I mean, it's not really like a prog thing, where it's like a multi-movement big piece. But each of those little bitty chunks fits together into a bigger picture, which I think is pretty clever too.
Thanks. I mean, yeah. I mean, above everything else is the Beatles for me. I mean, it's it's the book. It's the open up the book and how you're going to write a song. But my father and uncles had a Beatles tribute band, so like I grew up. I mean, there wasn't a time where I wasn't familiar with the entire Beatles catalog. So just like by the time I think I played in first grade, I played Twist and Shout on drums in the elementary school talent show. So it was like from the time I was 4, I was drumming along with Beatles songs. But yeah, the Beatles, pretty much Beatles, Weezer, Queen are like the top 3, 4, 5 acts, in that list for me.
So that being said, you're talking a little bit about your writing process earlier, and how like lyrics come for you last. So when you come in, especially you were talking about some of those earlier songs, like do you come at it like I have friends who write songs that are like, I'm going to write a song like a Who song, and then you just you reinvent that, or is it you come in like totally blank slate and just kind of like more intuitive than that?
It's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, more than not, I'll be sitting around or driving or doing something, and a melody will come to me, and I'll just get out the voice note and be like, okay, that's pretty. And then I start hearing chords as I'm singing the melody, and I'll try to translate that. And then as soon as I can, I'll grab a guitar or try to get to the piano. In the last year, I've been around the house for most of the year, so usually I'm pretty close to the instrument. But that's usually the first step for me. Occasionally, I'll just be sitting at the piano and stumble on some chords or something, and occasionally I'll be like, hey, I should write like a Weezer song, but more times than not, it just kind of comes to me with a melody first, and I'll be, okay, that's a pretty catchy hook, or that's a kind of a cool idea for a song. And then I'll just leave the voice note, and then a lot of times I'll just come back to, I'll take some time and start going through the voice notes, and go, oh, that's cool. That's a worthwhile idea to expand on. Or I'll just go and be like, yeah, that's rubbish. But like Hawaiian Shores on the album, actually the section of it it's kind of a medley, and the section of it that's technically called Back to You. Yeah, so I was on the beach in Hawaii, and I had this voice note that was labeled Hawaii, and I went back to the voice note, and I was like, that's pretty catchy. Why is that labeled Hawaii? And I was like, oh, that's right, I was there. But I started writing some lyrics around it just being labeled Hawaii, and that kind of became Hawaiian Shores, and the whole thing sparked it from there. So it kind of, usually melody is the first step, and lyrics are the last, but the in-between is kind of all over the place.
And another thing that I think is a real triumph for this album, you talk about writing from home and having things nearby, is the production quality, I think, of the album is really pretty amazing. So
thank you.
Is that you did that all at your house?
There's about 3 or 4 songs maybe on the album that I cut drums at a studio before the pandemic hit. Everything else was recorded basically in the room I'm sitting in right now. So I had cut a handful of songs that I had demos for ahead of time. I had gone into a studio and knocked out a bunch of drum tracks, and I ended up using about 3 or 4 of those songs. But everything else was cut here. And I had, we were living in an apartment about 6 months before the pandemic hit, and we decided, I was looking at renting a studio and keeping the apartment, and then we were like, you know what, we could probably, if we moved on the other side of LA, we could probably rent a house and find a place where I could kind of set up shop in the house. So really fortunately, I was just about done setting up the studio in like February, right before everything hit, and I had kind of figured out, all right, I can find a way to track some drums in the house, I can find a way to cut everything, and then the next thing we knew, we were in the place for the next year. So it was like, well, that worked out.
Yeah, you're right on. I had just done a post the other day about Eddie Van Halen building his home studio, and about how in the 80s that was a big deal. And about how now, like, you can make a home studio with respectable recordings. You're proving that theory, because I really am blown away. Even like I have professional albums I hear from other people that with bigger studios, I don't know, that don't sound as clear as the things. It's great sounds you got throughout the entire album. I think it's great.
Thank you, appreciate it. I mean, that I'm really proud of, because that was the one thing that I had worked with other producers, and drums especially, because I'm picky with drum sounds as a drummer first, that I was like, you just can't get the same sound recording in a room or in a bedroom. And I kind of have this weird hybrid of, I actually have like, they're electronic drums, but they look like real drums that I ordered, and then I used real cymbals. And so I kind of get, I can change out the different drum sounds in the computers, different samples and stuff, and then I'm getting live cymbals, which they can't really replicate cymbals yet. No, they just don't. But the combination of the two, I was really happy with, and I think it holds up next to the live drums that are on the album too. So like, people can't really tell which songs were that set up that was recorded in this little room here, or the ones that I did in like this giant studio with like 20-foot ceilings and a million mics and stuff.
Do you have any long-term plans about putting a band together and doing this stuff live?
I would love to, and I have a band. I have a band that I, occasionally will put together to play like a set of my originals. I hope to. I would love to play this whole album from top to bottom. Like, I think so. I've been thinking some ideas of what kind of lineup I would need. Like, what if I need to add a couple pieces to be able to pull the whole thing off. But yeah, I would love to get it live. And this album in particular, I did hear it as a live band album, even though it's me playing all the instruments. Like, I still like to think of, even though it's a solo album, it's not like singer-songwriter. Like, I feel like it has the vibe of a band. Hopefully, at least that comes across. But so yeah, I can't wait to, once everyone's all vaxxed up, we can take it to the stage.
I in my mind, especially one of my favorite songs of the album, this is whenever I really knew you meant business, is when I got to Fire in the Pouring Rain. And that song, like, I was listening to it for the first time. Sometimes I listen to music as I'm going to bed, and I was like, man, that's some heavy stuff going on in that song. Just, you don't hear the power ballads like that as much anymore, at least like that. And I envisioned like this, like, arena level Pink Floyd show with like screens and stuff, and it's a shame that sort of thing doesn't happen anymore, but it feels like that's the kind of theatrical thing that could happen with this particular album.
I would love to, and I'm a big fan of a show. Like, I'm a big fan of a production, and I've pulled off things like on a small scale, but be able to, like, I have a projector that can, like, project super wide on a stage that you only, that you can do it on a smaller stage and still do a big production, and I have lights and stuff, so I have ideas of ways to pull off more of a theatrical show, even in like a club venue kind of thing, to really bring out a show for it. So it's definitely in the works of how I picture bringing it live.
Yeah, that would be real cool. Real cool. All right, 2 real quick other questions, just curious about. So,
yeah, sure.
Favorite Queen album?
Ooh, maybe A Day at the Races. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would probably. I mean, I'm a big fan of. I can find like a favorite song on every album to go through and be like, that's arguably one of my top 5, top 3 favorite Queen songs, like straight through, like up to like Show Must Go On. I love.
Oh
and
gosh.
it's just like, yeah, I know, and it's just like I could go through the whole catalog and be like, arguably that's one of my top 2, 3 favorite songs. But Day at the Races, like I feel like their production was just like smooth sailing by then. They had their sound. Brian May's like playing his ass off on it. Like it's just like he's got the orchestral guitar thing down there where it's just like at its peak. Like they started getting away from that a little bit later where they were like, all right, jazz and some of the other stuff, like they're branching out, but like there it's just kind of quintessential. Yeah.
Favorite Van Halen album?
You know what? It's funny. I grew up. I love Van Halen, but I grew up in the like Hagar era, and like in the '90s, I was like the thing that kind of pulled me into Van Halen. This is ridiculous. The song that they had on. Well, really, the first thing that I discovered Van Halen was like the Crystal Pepsi. Right Now, I thought was like, this is the coolest song I have ever heard in my life, and the Pepsi is clear. Like this just blew my mind. I think that was like '92, something like.
Probably,
anyway.
That's about right. Yeah.
And then I got just their greatest hits, and their greatest hits like I played all the time. I just got every greatest hits I could possibly find on CD in like the '90s. I signed up for like the BMG Columbia House, and I was like 12. And like my dad and mom would just send out these things and be like, "This kid's 11 years old. Stop sending bills." And I would just get 12 at a time, just greatest hits, greatest hits. So Van Halen's greatest hits, like it took me a while before I was like, "Oh, this is 2 different singers." Like I'm like they just really changed their sound. And then I went back. I mean, their first album is probably still my favorite.
Yeah.
Now as an adult, but like at the time it was like I loved the Hagar stuff as much as I loved the David Lee Roth because
Sure.
I just didn't even know the difference when I first discovered her.
Yeah, that's cool. I was just a little bit previous because I actually got into Van Halen in junior high in 1984. In 1984 when it came out, and I'm like, I had headphones on. Mom and Dad didn't want me listening to it, but I got on board really hardcore with the Hagar lineup too. It's because he's just a brilliant, amazing singer, and it kind of lined up with where Eddie was trying to branch off and do his own thing a little more.
And what I think is a shame is that there's some great songs that they did in that whole period, and I thought it was kind of a shame. It's a shame that he's gone. Period. But it was a shame that they never got to play those songs for like the last like 15 years of their career. I'm like, like it's got to be weird for those guys to write, to not play songs that it's like half your career. I mean, it's like to be like, all right, we're gonna go out on the road, and I mean, I saw them the last tour they did with David Lee Roth. I saw them at the Hollywood Bowl, and it was great, and it was fun. I mean, David Lee Roth is so over the top now. I saw him open up for Kiss about 4 days before they locked everything down in LA last year. Kiss came through, and it was like David Lee Roth. He had like taken it up another level since even before, like when I saw him with Van Halen the last time. And I was like, all right, this is like a cartoon now, but it was.
He knows though. That's his whole thing.
He knows it. It was great, and it's so much fun. But
in my opinion, he's as good at being like that vaudevillian personality. That's like his virtuosity. Is in being that kind of entertainer. Not really as a singer, but certainly as like a guy that can command a crowd and can talk to people and just talk gibberish and somehow make it make sense. It's an amazing skill for sure.
Absolutely.
All right. That's all I really wanted to know. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Thanks for the invite.
And I mean, currently the Tale from the Other Side is probably one of my favorite albums I've gotten this year so far. I've gotten a lot of albums at the beginning of this year, but like 3 or 4 of them were sticking out, and that one immediately was like, this is one for sure. So
I appreciate it. I mean, I feel like it's been really flattering, like the reaction that people have had that have like really, you know, because I put so much into it over the course of a year that like people like you that are like picking it apart, and I'm like, oh, this guy gets it. Like he got all the even like the Dusk Till Dawn thing, like the turn. I'm like, it's great that people are picking up on the.
Well, again, when you invest thought and yourself in an album like that, it shows. And those of us that I like to listen deeply to stuff, I really appreciate that level of depth with stuff for sure.
I saw you posted something on Instagram of the Scenes from Memory, the Dream Theater album, and that actually was kind of like the first big rock prog thing. I had a buddy that was like totally into them, and he brought me to see them, and he was a couple years older than me, and he brought me in, I guess, it came out like 99, something like that, and that was like the first show. And that album was actually an influence. There's like some things on this album that I pulled in from there, like even the
TikTok at the beginning, dude. Yeah, I was like, that's kind of
yeah, absolutely,
very good. That I have never posted on that album, but that's one I would really like to do because I've got some really strong opinions about Dream Theater in general. But that's the one. That's the one where they got it all right.
That's honestly, that's the only album that I've listened to other albums of theirs, but like not more than like twice. Like I've listened to like some of the Liquid Tension jamming stuff more than I've listened to some of the other Dream Theater stuff. But that album, I'm a huge fan of.
And you want to talk about an album with a great story. I mean, the way that he crafted the storyline is like a little bit too long at the end. It kind of milked the ending a little bit. But man, like as far as just having a story and like it's a story you can sit down and talk to people about it. Like I had a friend who was into it and like, what do you think happened? I don't know. Did she kill herself at the end? I don't know what happened. And so it's really pretty one of the better as far as storytelling goes. One of the better rock operas there is out there. It's tough with a rock opera, to make a story that works without just putting filler in. And that was one of the ones that it happened on.
Yeah, that was definitely an influence on this album for sure. And it was like as far as crafting the story and being like, all right, leaving it ambiguous enough. I like the idea of that where it's like, okay, there's enough things in here. I've done a couple of interviews now, and a couple of the interviews, I think they have their whole different take on it, and I'm like, but that's cool. I like that. Like I want people to I have in my head like a story, and I kind of script it out and at some point I had an idea of maybe doing like some kind of animation or something to it, but just to have people have their own different take of it is cool too.
Yeah, I purposefully not ask you about what things mean, to be honest, because I really love the way that it is ambiguous, that it can be multiply interpreted. And sure, if you know what happened in 2020, unless you're like under some rock or something and didn't know about it, you wouldn't necessarily know what that was what it was about. But like Fire in the Pouring Rain, like all the call signs are in there. You talk about 100,000 people gone and stuff like that, and it's like it just rings.
There's just a little something about that song. So the first verse of that song I wrote without hopefully ruining the song for you. No, but the first verse of that song I wrote in what year was it? It was 2017, I think, the end of 2017. And back to back, there was the shooting in Las Vegas where there was like the mass shooting, and the next night Tom Petty died, or vice versa. I think it was the next night Tom Petty died, and I wrote that whole first verse, and I had like the melody for that, and it just sat because I didn't know where to take it from there, and I'm like, I don't have another verse for this, and it sat around, and then when everything happened last year, I was like, oh, I have a second verse like this, and I just started writing, and I kind of finished up the rest of the song last year, but it sat around for like 3 years because I was like, well, this is really like a sad song, like, but I don't want to just do like filler lyrics for another verse. I just didn't have anything that vibed. I remember hearing "Warmth of the Sun," Brian Wilson wrote right after JFK was shot.
Yeah.
And I always just thought, I was like, God, what a beautiful song that he wrote, like in such a sad time. And I'm just like, that's. But so the first verse, if you listen to it, it's "Fire from the Sky." It was like that's about the shooting, and then there's a couple lines in there about Tom Petty in that like ambiguous, like nobody would ever know. I use his Traveling Wilburys alias Charlie T. Wilbury is what he goes. I saw Charlie T. just a week and a half before. I saw him at the Hollywood Bowl literally a week and a half before he died. So without getting too literal on the rest of the lyrics, but that first verse right there was about.
That's so cool. That's super cool. Another part of this too, that when you have that one vignette in the middle and like the power goes out, and they're like, "Don't panic," all that stuff. Shortly after I got that, I live in Texas, so we had the snowpocalypse, and so right after that happened, we were literally like, if your power fails, and I'm listening to an album that's talking about if your power fails, like that was all a real thing for us for a while there too. I was fortunate because I lived close to a hospital. So I never lost power, but man, it was wacky.
It's horrible. It's horrible. Yeah, I have some family members down there, and they went to a hotel and they were okay, but their whole place got flooded, and they rented a house, so they're kind of he's in the army, and his whole family had to go into the hotel. He's like, but we rent, so like. All the damage to the house wasn't our problem, so like we're fortunate. It was a pain in the ass to have to go to a hotel for a week or whatever. He goes, but we had it better than so many other people had it. But
No doubt. All right. Well, again, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about all this. I had a great time talking to you about it.
Yeah, same.
Having context on music is what it's about for me. I can listen to something real flatly and appreciate it, but the more I understand about where it's coming from, the more it gets me. So
awesome. Well, thanks. Thanks for digging into it. Just even when I saw the first video that popped up, I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like this guy really really gets it. Like it's really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome, man. All right, well, I won't take any more of your time. I got to make sure that the family's asleep and everything, so I'll be in touch with you.
Cool. Yeah, man, keep in touch. Absolutely. Take care, man.